Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to this week's Business in 2021 webinar presentation. My name is Kathy Purdy, and I'm a marketing manager here at Bond. I'd just like to go over two quick housekeeping items before we get started. Please enter your questions using the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer those as time allows. Once today's webinar has ended, we would appreciate you taking a moment to complete the brief survey. Your comments and suggestions are important to our panelists and also provide us with topics for future presentations. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Adam Mastrolio.
Kathy, thank you so much, and welcome to everyone who is joining us on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon here in upstate New York. It's getting cold and the snow's about to fall, so welcome. Thank you for spending some time with us. We have another great program for you today. There are a number of updates in the COVID realm that we are going to be covering. Starting us off today is Katie Anderson. We usually put Katie last because she likes to back cleanup and brings home all the relevant information to you. But today she's going to hit lead off and give us an update from Albany plus some additional information. So Katie, please take it away.
All right, I am happy to be going first for once. What a change of pace for us all. It's been what, 52 weeks I think since the last time I went first on this. All right, here we go. So as I predicted last week, it has come to pass. We see that the COVID spike that I said was going to happen is happening post-Thanksgiving. This steady increase in cases is really quite something to look at, and it is alarming, especially when you look at the number increase from the average from last week to this week. As you can see, it's a 3,000 jump in cases daily that are occurring between last week and this week. That's significant. Over 14 days, we've seen a 41% increase in the number of cases. We're seeing all of that occur. Hospitalizations are increasing. The number of deaths are increasing. And of course, the number of tests are also increasing. Now, a lot of this is the post Thanksgiving spike. This is also potentially related to a new variant. The post-Thanksgiving spike, we are in the period where people who saw, who tested positive, who were exposed on Thanksgiving, they're testing positive now. And whoever else they saw are now testing positive as well. So it's really a snowball effect from Thanksgiving. But in terms of vaccination progress, nothing like a new variant to go and push people to go get vaccinated. Every number has jumped up 1% in the last week. Hopefully we will get to 70% fully vaccinated by next week, just because I am a fan of even numbers more than anything else. Looking again at the county by county vaccination progress versus hotspots in New York State. The hotspots that were red last week, a lot of them have turned dark red this week. And the ones that were dark red last week remain dark red this week. Specifically, again, Washington County in the capital region, it is not going well out there. Steuben, we're looking at these counties where, it's a lot of activities happening there. And especially compared to what's happening in New York City, where cases are increasing, but like the borough of Manhattan has an extremely high vaccination rate, the cases are not increasing to anywhere close to the same degree that they are spreading in other places across the state. So that's why we're seeing a little bit of a change with New York City, and don't worry, we will be covering what's happening in New York City in a little bit. 32 hospitals have now fallen under the governor's order to cease their elective surgeries. We discussed this last week. This is related to Executive Order 11 issued by the governor. This requires that hospitals that are at a certain level of their capacity, they have 90% of their beds full, or they only have 10% of their beds empty, whichever way you decide to look at that, they will be asked to cancel their elective surgeries. This is the list of hospitals that have to cancel their elective surgery. No, these are all upstate hospitals. None of these hospitals are in the downstate region. And that's because that's where we've seen the spread occurring. So 32 hospitals have their elective surgeries canceled. And we will see how that number changes over the coming weeks. This is supposed to be a rolling basis. So if, for example, the one that I just looked at was Saratoga Hospital, right? It was right in my eye line. So say Saratoga Hospital has their capacity go back down to, they are only 85% full. The elective surgeries, the governor may order that the elective surgeries may resume at that point. So this is meant to be a very flexible metric that we're using here, and how hospital elective surgeries are being canceled. Looking at the new variant, there are 12 confirmed cases as of the time I made these slides at 7 a.m. I'm sure that's changed by now in New York State. I did also say to you last week that I would be certain that it was already in New York and spreading, and that was also correct. There have been cases of the Omicron variant linked to the Anime New York City convention that occurred on November 19th to November 21st. There were thousands of people at this event. Vaccination was required. Masks were required. But we're not seeing, you would think that by now we would have heard if this was a super spreader event. It really hasn't been, but people have been alerted that this is, these are people who came from all over to come to this convention. So the contact tracing is very difficult with a mass gathering event like this. So what do we know about this variant? And the answer is how much we don't know. It's still too early to know anything for certain about this variant. Preliminary updates out of South Africa show that the variant has been moving quickly, but it appears to be less severe. That part of it, we don't know for sure. We just don't know if that's true. We don't know, any of it, but we do see that there has been an enormous increase in COVID cases in South Africa over the past 2 weeks. In South Africa now, around a little bit less than 25% of their COVID tests are coming back positive every day, versus 2 weeks ago, it was only around 2% of their cases were coming back positive. So that's a big jump that we're seeing in South Africa. And I am pretty sure you're going to see a jump like that occurring elsewhere. We are seeing that occur as we speak in New York. And I wouldn't be surprised if it happens elsewhere at this point. But again, we will wait and see what else is happening here with Omicron. It's too early to really be able to tell what the data shows in terms of its severity. There are new international travel requirements though. So beginning on December 6th, so yesterday, all air passengers coming into the United States, regardless of their vaccination status, need to show a negative COVID test taken no more than 1 day before in order to enter into the US. So that's a shift. It was 3 days, and a problem has quickly occurred, which is PCR tests often take 2 to 3 days to get the results from. This is saying that the test needs to be taken no more than 1 day before you travel. So what is that going to do? It's likely going to push people to receive rapid tests, which we know are less accurate. But it may also be an impetus to try to speed up PCR tests. It is hard, I don't know. PCR tests are more involved to see how they work. So this change is already causing a lot of headaches. That's been a tough thing to implement, but I think that going forward, I wouldn't be surprised to see that this is just going to remain. This is going to be just the way that we have to travel via air. Again, this only applies to air travel. So going back and forth between Canada and the US, other rules apply. Assuming you're not flying to Canada, if you're just driving over there for some reason. Okay, and then briefly, I will finish up with a teaser about the New York City vaccine mandate and other changes that are occurring in New York City. We're going to have Sarah Luke cover this in a lot more detail than what I'm doing right now. But the mayor of New York City announced that this vaccine mandate is taking place. It's effective as of December 27th. Additional info will be coming on December 15th. No order has yet been issued, so we really don't have a ton to say. Also, there have been changes to the Key to New York City program. That's a program where you have to show proof of vaccination in order to engage in indoor dining and fitness and theater, movies, activities like that. The change is that by December 14th, children 5 to 11, excuse me, that's a typo, 5 to 11 need to show proof of vaccination. And then adults, as of December 27th, full vaccination is required to do those events. One big question here, and one that I'll leave Sarah to discuss, I think is, obviously I am always fascinated about the political side of things, but New York City has a new mayor coming in on January 1st. That new mayor, Eric Adams, is currently in Ghana. He is having a vacation there right now. So he is not in New York City right now. I don't know, and I don't believe that he was really involved in these discussions about the vaccine mandate. He really hasn't commented on it because he is out of the country. So whether the vaccine mandate remains in place as of January 1 is an open question. And I think one that we won't have a definite answer to until he returns to the country at the very earliest. And with that, I am done.
Not so fast, Katie. I have a couple of quick follow-ups. First of all, on the travel travel testing requirement that we saw, that only applies to international travel, correct?
Correct.
All right, so there is no domestic travel testing requirement. If you all recall, New York used to have this list of prohibited states, so to speak, where you'd have to get tested when you came back from a particular state. You'd have to quarantine. That's all gone, correct?
Correct. If something like that was to occur, it would likely come from the federal government at this point, because remember, the governor has has much more limited power and authority than the prior governor did in June of 2020 when that was instituted. So it would have to come from the federal government. I wouldn't be surprised if the federal government does institute a more stringent mandatory testing thing for domestic flights. But again, we don't know where that's going to shake out. The airplane industry really doesn't necessarily want that.
And that transitions nicely into one of the questions we received in the Q&A section, which is, have you heard anything that we're going to see a statewide vaccination mandate for everyone?
So the governor today, I believe, just said she's not doing that. She has for a long time been saying she doesn't have the authority to do a vaccine mandate. She arguably doesn't have the authority to even do a mask mandate, which is why she has stayed out of that, I think, because she doesn't have that directive, the power to issue directives at this point. Could she get creative with Department of Health regulations? Yes. But that's a lot harder to do than just issue a directive, which she can't do. So I don't know. She did just say that today, that she's not interested in doing a statewide vaccine mandate. So I think that answers her question.
All right, one more quick Albany related question. Have we heard anything about whether the HERO Act designation is going to get extended again?
So no, we haven't heard anything. That is as of December 15th is when we will be looking for that. Again, if I'm a betting woman, which I'm really not, but I would bet with 99% certainty that is going to be extended into January at the very least. They may do it until January 31st, and even 45 days or so. But I would just presume that it is going to be extended. Our rates are even higher than they were when it was extended the last time. New York is in that CDC substantial high level of transmission. So therefore, that's what they've been relying on to extend the HERO Act. So I think it's safe to say they're going to extend the HERO Act.
Okay, Katie, thank you. I will let you go, but you stay here in case we have any extra questions for you, okay?
You got it.
All right. Okay, moving on, we are going to cover something that I think is relevant to many of our attendees, and that is this new contractor portal that OFCCP is requiring for certain entities. So here to talk to us about that today is Hannah Redmond. Hannah is an attorney in our Syracuse office in the labor and employment practice and has looked at this issue and is going to present for us. So Hannah, please go ahead.
Thanks, Adam, and hello, everybody. We're going to take a brief break from all of the COVID content today to provide an update on the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, aka the OFCCP, their new online portal for certifying affirmative action programs. I'm going to start with a little bit of background, and then I'll jump into the new changes with the portal. So by way of background, the OFCCP is part of the United States Department of Labor, and it's responsible for ensuring that employers who do business with the federal government comply with laws and regulations that prohibit discrimination. Federal contractors that meet certain criteria, and I'm going to get into those criteria in just a few minutes, must develop and maintain affirmative action programs, or AAPs, and I'll refer to these as AAPs today. Next slide, please. Thank you. AAPs are intended to ensure that applicants and employees have equal opportunities for recruitment, job placement, and advancement without regard to protected characteristics such as sex, race, religion, and disability or veteran status. AAPs address contractors' commitment to preventing discrimination, and they also outline the contractors' policies and practices for recruiting women and minorities, people with disabilities, and veterans. Covered contractors are required to certify that they have an AAP on an annual basis. Next slide, please. So who must submit an AAP? The OFCCP has told us that supply and service contractors with at least 50 employees that meet certain monetary contract thresholds have to submit certify rather that they have compliant AAPs. And so for under the Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act and Executive Order 11246, that means that a contractor has a single federal contract of at least $50,000, or under the Vietnam Era Veterans Readjustment Assistance Act, that means a contractor has a single federal contract of $150,000 or more. The OFCCP has also stated that for now, construction contractors do not need to certify AAP compliance. So we're limited to supply and service contractors. And I know also that these thresholds are only for the written AAP requirements. There are other monetary contract thresholds that apply to different requirements that the OFCCP imposes on federal contractors. Historically, AAP certifications have been submitted through mail or email. Last week, however, the OFCCP revealed its new online platform. And through this platform, federal contractors will certify that they're meeting the requirement to develop and maintain an AAP. The portal is formally called the Affirmative Action Program Verification Interface. I'm going to keep calling it the portal. And it's intended to create a more efficient system for contractors and for the OFCCP. Contractors can now certify their compliance online, and the OFCCP can better track and monitor compliance. Also during audits, the portal can be used for contractors to submit their AAP to show that it does meet the legal requirements. Next slide, please. Kathy, can you advance the slide for me? Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so this slide shows the rollout timeline for the portal. The portal will open for registration on February 1st of 2022. Federal contractors will be able to access the portal and register their company, verify that the information is correct. Right now, if you click on the portal landing page, you'll just see kind of an informational snippet about what the portal is and what it'll be used for. On February 1st of 2022, the OFCCP will also begin outreach to those contractors whose contact information it already has. On March 31st, the certification period will begin and contractors will be able to use the portal to certify that they have developed an AAP, that they maintain an AAP that is legally compliant. And on June 30th of 2022, that certification period will end. Next slide, thank you. So along with announcing the new portal, the OFCCP also released several FAQs. Those FAQs mostly cover what we've just gone over today. But one additional thing to note is that certifying compliance using the portal does not exempt contractors from compliance audits. Audits can still occur, and that's when you'll use the portal to upload your AAP to show that you have one and that it meets the requirements. And with that, I will turn it back over.
Hannah, thank you. I think that is very, very valuable information. We also have a blog post about that on Bond's Labor and Employment blog, which you hear me plug virtually every webinar. So if you have any questions, you can look at the blog post and any written materials we have as well. So thank you, Hannah, very much. Okay, next topic is going to be New York City updates. There have been a number of updates coming out of New York City, and who better to talk about those New York City updates than one of our New York City attorneys, Sarah Luke. Sarah is a higher education attorney who works in the Labor Department and is up to speed on all of the recent flurry of regulations and rules from Mayor de Blasio. So Sarah, please take it away.
Great, thank you, Adam. And thanks also to Katie Anderson for giving a little preview of some of what we learned just yesterday coming from the mayor's office. So for those of you that don't know, yesterday, Mayor de Blasio announced what he called a preemptive strike against the Omicron variant of COVID-19. So these are proactive measures that the city wants to take in order to kind of get on the defense against this new variant and hopefully position the city well to weather this next COVID storm. There are two primary components to the preemptive strike. And one thing, and I think, Katie highlighted this, and it's going to contrast well with Hannah's very detailed presentation. So there's a lot we don't know. The mayor announced this yesterday. We don't have an executive order yet. And in my legal career, it wasn't until COVID-19 that I started relying on Twitter and social media to kind of get the legal landscape. But first, I'll share what we do know about these two components. So the first is an employer mandate that would apply to private employers. One way to think of it is it's kind of an extension of the mandate that currently exists for city employees. And this would require 1 dose of an approved vaccine for all employees by December 27, 2021. The mandate is unique because there's no testing alternative anticipated. Notably, it would only apply to employees who work on site. So for people that are working remotely, wouldn't apply to them. Also, we expect religious and medical exemptions to be part of this mandate. So that's something for employers to think about proactively. Do you have a process or infrastructure already in place to consider those kinds of requests for exemption? We do hope to receive guidance from the city by December 15, detailed guidance, so that you can have more of a concrete idea of the expectations with respect to this mandate. In addition to that mandate, many of you are probably already familiar with the Key to New York City Executive Order. Well, that's going to be expanded. So it's going to be expanded to include children ages 5 to 11. The vaccination requirement that currently exists for dining indoors, for entertainment venues, and for gyms would also apply to kids. And that component of the mandate for children, 1 dose of the vaccine would be required as of December 14. So that's only 7 days from today. We're moving quickly. In addition, children ages 5 to 11 would be required to get vaccinated to participate in high-risk extracurricular activities. So this is something new. The original executive order didn't say anything about high-risk extracurricular activities, but these would include things like sports, band and orchestra concerts, dance. I hope that there will be more guidance on this because some sports occur outdoors, and I don't know how that would impact. If it would only be those that would be occurring within indoor facilities that would otherwise fall under the executive order. We don't really know yet, but what we do know is that the participants would be required to have 1 dose of the vaccination by December 14. So again, we're moving quickly with not a lot of information. For adults, originally under the Key to New York City executive order, 1 dose of an approved vaccine was required. And now, as of December 27, adults will have to be fully vaccinated in order to have access to these areas. So as Katie alluded to, there are a lot of open questions. We don't really know how the city will enforce the employer mandate, but we hope to know more through the guidance that we expect to receive on December 15. So stay tuned for that. In addition, Mayor de Blasio indicated that Eric Adams thinks his idea is great and is gung-ho about it, but we really don't know what will happen and how the new mayor will choose to implement these guidelines in the city. So given all the things we don't know, you might wonder, why are we mentioning this? Why is this important? Well, I think it's important for a couple of reasons. This gives us the opportunity to work proactively. So if you are a business that is subject to Key to New York City, so you have operations indoors that have a vaccine requirement, you might want to give your patrons a heads up. Hey, we understand that the city is taking this move. And so if we're catering to children, these are the new requirements. There's not a lot of time to get, before these things become effective. So the more advance notice we can give our patrons, probably the better. With respect to the employee mandate, if you haven't had a vaccine requirement in your workspace before, you're probably going to want to, first of all, communicate to employees, because again, there's not a lot of time. And also consider how you will handle requests for exemption should you receive them, because that's not something that you want to be caught off guard with. And it's really important to make principled decisions and ones that are consistent across employee requests. So there are some things that we can do in advance. There's not a lot of advance notice, but that's what keeps things interesting. And we will do our best to keep you well informed. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you so much. We've gotten a couple of questions in the Q&A section that I think are easy to address. First of all, we've had this one question asked several different times, and that is, does full vaccination mean 2 shots plus a booster shot, or is it just what we've always heard, which is 2 doses of Moderna or Pfizer or 1 dose of Johnson & Johnson?
It's the latter. It's two doses of the mRNA or 1 dose of J&J.
Correct, and it's 14 days after your last dose.
Yes.
of either of those series. Those are some good questions. I know there has been some talk about extending or changing the definition of fully vaccinated, but that has not happened yet. So for now, you still go off of the definition that we've been using for the past year. So those are great questions. Sarah, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. And with that, we will move on. Okay, so I'm going to give a little presentation this afternoon about the status of vaccine mandates. And to introduce that topic, I just want to point out a couple of things. You have to think about vaccine mandates on a number of different levels. You have the federal government issuing vaccine mandates, and we're going to talk about the 3 federal vaccine mandates this afternoon. You have the state government, at least in New York, that has issued its own vaccine mandate in the healthcare context for hospitals and nursing homes. You then have localities like cities also issuing vaccine mandates, like what Sarah just talked about. And then the lowest level is the micro level, individual employers, some individual employers who are not subject to any of those city, state, or federal vaccine mandates have decided on their own to issue a vaccine mandate. So you have multiple levels of vaccine mandates. And today, what I'm going to cover are the 3 different federal vaccine mandates, what they are, where they are, and what's the status of them, because all 3 of them are actually in a similar state. So let's start with the federal contractor mandate. First of all, who is covered by the federal contractor mandate? And this is a pretty simple question. Do you have a contract with the federal government or a government contractor? So in other words, are you a subcontractor? That includes a clause that states your company will comply with all guidance for contractor or subcontractor workplace locations published by the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force. That's really it. So if you are in a contract or a subcontract with the federal government, that includes a particular clause saying you're going to comply with the safety regulations, then you are subject to the federal contractor mandate. This is relevant for contracts that are going to be entered into after November 14th. But it's also relevant to those contracts that are already in existence, because the federal contractor mandate encourages the federal government to try to work that clause into pre-existing contracts. So if you have a pre-existing federal contract that would potentially qualify you, you may be hearing from the government, if you haven't already, that they like to put this clause in and subject you to the contractor vaccine mandate. For contracts that are awarded before November 14th, it's also important to point out that when you extend those contracts, you're going to have to include this clause as well. Next slide, please. Go ahead and click that. Okay. So we saw who is covered. Now here's what the mandate is. It says covered contractors must ensure that all covered contractor employees are fully vaccinated for COVID unless the employee is legally entitled to an accommodation. Covered contractors, we just talked about that. Next bullet, please. Importantly, this mandate allows for both religious and medical accommodations. If for those of you in the healthcare context, if you're a hospital or a nursing home employer, you know that the New York State mandate does not allow you to provide religious accommodations to patient-facing employees. So the federal contractor mandate does allow for both religious and medical accommodations. We've talked about how you go about getting those requests from employees in the past. You should have your employees fill out an exemption form if they're going to be seeking either a religious or a medical accommodation. In addition, if you read this mandate, it talks about covered contractor employees. We already talked about who covered contractors are, but who are covered contractor employees? Those are any full-time or part-time employees working for a covered contractor on or in connection with a covered contract. So that's someone who's actually working on the contract. You may be a business, part of your business works on federal contracts, part does not. So you are a covered contractor employee if you're working on the specific federal contract, or if you're working at a covered contractor workplace. So this is where the government got expansive in trying to cover more employees than just those who work on federal contracts. If you are a covered contractor and you have some employees working in a workplace who are working on federal contracts, and you have other employees who are not, according to this mandate, all of those employees would need to be vaccinated. Next slide, please. The mandate defines covered contractor workplace as a location controlled by a covered contractor at which any employee of a covered contractor working on or in connection with a covered contract is likely to be present. So they go even further. So it's not just those employees who are working on a particular contract. It's a location where those employees working on a contract are likely to be present during the period of performance. So practically speaking, what does this mean? It's any location at which any employee performing work on or in connection with a covered contract is likely to be present, converts the entire workplace into a covered workplace, which means all employees at that workplace, regardless of whether they're working on a covered contract, are going to be subject to the mandate. So the only exception that's provided in the mandate is employees working entirely from home. So this is a fairly expansive vaccine mandate. The federal government is clearly trying to extend its reach beyond just those people who are working on federal contracts. Next slide, please. Okay, so deadlines, original deadlines. I shouldn't say original, most recent deadlines. Covered contractor employees must be fully vaccinated, meaning 2 weeks beyond receiving their last dose, no later than January 18th of 2022. So again, fully vaccinated is 2 weeks after last dose of a two-dose vaccine. So those are the deadlines for the federal contractor mandate. But as with the other federal vaccine mandates we're going to talk about, there's litigation going on. So next slide, please. So here is the status of the federal contractor mandate. There very recently, within the last week, has been a stay issued by a federal court in Kentucky of enforcement of this federal contract mandate, and it applies in the states of Kentucky, Ohio, and Tennessee. At this point, there are no other stays in any other states. Federal courts have taken different approaches when they are placing stays on these vaccine mandates. This particular court in Kentucky only applied the stay to those 3 states. So for now in New York, the federal contractor mandate remains, and the deadlines for vaccinating your employees or ensuring that your employees are vaccinated remain as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about the federal contractor vaccine mandate. The second federal vaccine mandate is OSHA's emergency temporary standard. So who is covered by this regulation? Number 1, employees with 100 plus employees, employers with 100 plus employees. That's pretty much it. The exceptions are employers covered by the federal contractor mandate that we just talked about, or employers covered by the OSHA healthcare ETS. Next slide. And what does OSHA's emergency temporary standard require? It requires you to have a policy that allows your employees to either be fully vaccinated or vaccinated, test, and mask, or give your employees the option to either be vaccinated or test and mask. I'm not going to go through this in detail. We've done presentations on this already. The bullet points on your screen will give you the overview of the 2 different options provided by the OSHA ETS, but they're there. Next slide, please. Under the OSHA ETS, employers were supposed to prepare a written policy by December 5th, 2021, and we'll talk about why that's not necessarily required at this point, but that's what was contained in the original ETS. OSHA provided templates. Those templates are there for you if you wanted to click on the links in the PowerPoint presentation, which I know is disseminated after the fact. Next slide, please. And employers had to determine and track vaccination status by the December 5th deadline, which again is not applicable for reasons we're going to discuss in just a moment. But here's what you had to do by December 5th. Next slide, please. More information on what you're required to do. I just tried to be thorough in the presentation. I don't want to read it all to you. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the status of OSHA's ETS? Now, I'm sure all of you have heard about this. There has been a nationwide stay of OSHA's ETS by the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals. In addition, OSHA has stated on its website that it is not going to be enforcing the ETS pending the outcome of the litigation. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals has been selected to hear all the various challenges to this ETS that have been filed across the country. And so they are doing that. For now, what that means is that the deadlines are stayed and that you don't have to implement this vaccine or vaccine test and mask policy for now. So that's where we are with the ETS. It's on hold. We're waiting to hear from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Next slide, please. So the third federal vaccine mandate is the CMS rule for healthcare workers. CMS is the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Who is covered under the CMS rule? Healthcare services, supporter suppliers that are regulated by CMS, including hospitals, ambulatory surgery centers, and the list goes on. Next slide, please. Here are the remaining categories of covered employers under the CMS rule. Now, I should note that it's only Medicare and Medicaid certified providers. Doesn't apply to other healthcare entities not regulated by CMS, such as private physician offices. Next slide, please. Okay, who must be vaccinated under the CMS rule? It's all current and future employees, whether clinical or non-clinical, including doctors, nurses, and medical staff, students, trainees, volunteers, and those who are not involved in direct patient, resident, or client care. It also includes anyone who provides, typo, I apologize there, treatment or services under a contract or other arrangement. So if you have a private provider who comes in to provide services at a hospital, they would in theory be covered under this rule. Next slide. Okay, so again, we talked about what's the rule, what's required, and what's the status. All right, so we have, with respect to the CMS rule, the Eastern District of Missouri and Western District of Louisiana issuing preliminary injunctions staying enforcement of this rule. And CMS has now taken the position as of this week that it is not going to enforce the rule pending the outcome of litigation. So with respect to the OSHA ETS and the CMS rule for healthcare providers, those are currently being stayed nationwide, and there's litigation that's ongoing that will determine whether those are enforceable or not. The federal contractor mandate remains in effect for New York for now, pending any decisions that would impact that rule, which we will be sure to keep you up on. So that is an overview of the three federal vaccine mandates, what they are and where they are in terms of court proceedings and status. All right, to close up, before we close up, I did want to address a couple of questions that you all had put in the Q&A section last week. And I just want to run through them. Hopefully I can get through a bunch of these quickly. I always try to get to the FAQs, but we don't have enough time. So I think I have a couple of minutes here. So first of all, does New York's paid COVID vaccine leave, so the 4 hours per shot that you have to pay, up to 4 hours per shot, I should say, does that include booster shots? The answer is yes. So that does include booster shots. There were a number of questions about how you pay out COVID leave to a part-time employee. So the rule is that an employee, let's say an employee who is under a quarantine order, gets up to the amount that they would be paid. Let's say it's an employer with over 100 employees during a 14-day period. So if the employee would work 10 days during the 14-day period, then they would get paid full for their 10 days. If they are a part-time employee, it's the amount that they would have received during that 14-day period, given their normal schedule. So if someone was a part-time employee, they work 2 days a week, and that's their consistent schedule, they would be entitled to 4 days of pay over that 14-day period, because 4 days is the normal amount of time that they would work during the 14-day period. If an employee is quarantined for 10 calendar days, but decides on his own to take additional days, do we have to pay COVID pay beyond the 10 calendar days? So the answer is your obligation to pay COVID leave is tied to the quarantine order. You pay for the amount of time they would ordinarily get paid in the 14-day period based on the quarantine order. If the quarantine order expires before the 14 days is up, and then your employee just takes more time on their own, then no, you wouldn't be required to pay COVID leave. It's based on the quarantine order. Can the COVID leave be paid from the employee's PTO? No. Unfortunately, COVID leave has to be provided in addition to an employee's PTO. It can't be charged against their other accruals. And we received a number of questions about whether or not the COVID leave was tied to the quarantine order itself. And the answer is yes. Now, there is one caveat to that. And I think Travis talked about this last week. In January of 2021, the Department of Labor put out guidance, which indicated that an employer who sent an employee home due to an exposure was required to provide COVID paid leave for that employee, even in the absence of a quarantine order. So that's the one caveat. The DOL has issued that guidance, which implies or states that you should pay even in the absence of a quarantine order if you, the employer, decide to send the employee home due to an exposure. So those are the questions, or a lot of the questions that we received last week. I hope you found this to be helpful. We will see you again next week. I'm sure there will be more updates and more relevant topics for you. So thank you for attending. We look forward to seeing you next week.